Hello and welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Remembrancers Library podcast. My name is Vincent, and in case you missed last week, my wonderful co-host Ethan is taking a small break to work on schoolwork. Things are really ramping up for him there, but he will be back once that has slowed down again for him. And today's episode, I'm going to be continuing where I left off last week with the Battle of Calth. Just a heads up right out of the gate, this bit going into it is going to be a lot more information heavy, and depending on where I get to with the recording going on here, this might be split into another part, and we'll have a 3-part series for this section of the lore. So I just wanted to get that out of the way before we get started here. And today I'll give you everybody a little bit of a recap, and then for sure we're going to get through the main battle here. And just before I get right into it, I'll get our house cleaning out of the way. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here with us. We really appreciate all of the interaction we've been getting lately. If you're here on the YouTube, drop us a like, give us a comment if there's anything that you feel like sharing, if there's any info, if you have any questions, anything like that. If you're here on the Spotify, give us a save, give us a download, give us a like there. That really helps. And of course, wherever you're at, if you want to share us to anybody that you think would enjoy our content, please do so. We wouldn't be here without you guys, and the more of you guys here, the more that we get to do. And with that, I will jump right into the episode. Getting right into it, I'm just going to run through a little bit of a recap quickly, because there was so much that was going on, and there's going to be so much going forward, so I'll just run through some bullet points here really quickly just to get that out of the way. So the Ultramarines and the Wordbearers are gathered on Calth, supposedly to deal with some remnant orc invasion after the Battle of Ultramar. So, and the Wordbearers are here under Horus's order. They're all there under Horus's order, but the Wordbearers have turned traitor, and they are ready to try and get rid of the Ultramarines. So first thing that the Wordbearers did is they took control of an Imperial fleet ship, and then after some time, the Wordbearers that had got down to the planet's surface to muster with the Ultramarines started doing all these rituals, and they broke down Calth's defense grid with a scrap code virus. And then that ship that they took control of shot at super speed through the main shipyard, disabling majority of the Ultramarine ships. On the planet's surface, the Wordbearers there turned and open-fired on the Ultramarines. Guilliman was trying to get Lorgar to stop because he thought this was a mistake, and Lorgar wasn't really doing anything there, and Guilliman said that all of the Ultramarines, he ordered them to at the very least protect themselves at this point. Then the order goes through for the Wordbearer ships to start bombarding the planet, and at this moment there's more communication between Guilliman and Lorgar. Lorgar explains the entirety of the heresy going on and all of that good stuff, and Guilliman vows to kill his former brother and wipe out the Wordbearers. And this is the official start of the battle when when Guilliman is now determined to take down Lorgar. After this little conversation that they have, Lorgar summons a bunch of demons to attack Guilliman's ship, the Macragge's Honor. The demons bust open the bridge of the ship where Guilliman was, and Guilliman gets sucked out into the void of space along with anyone else that was really on that bridge. And then Guilliman leaves Guilliman's in space. Lorgar leaves the system with a good number of his Wordbearers, and they're just going to go further into Ultramar, and start causing havoc and chaos there. And Lorgar leaves Corferon in charge of the battle on Calth. Corferon takes over the weapons grid and begins bombarding any of the other planets in close enough range, as well as that factory asteroid that was orbiting Calth as well. So, because of the initial surprise of the attack and the Wordbearers managing to take the Ultramarines completely by surprise, the Wordbearers were able to eliminate about half of the gathered Ultramarines. And even though at that time they were like, yeah, we did it, this is going to be easy peasy, they forgot about the fact that the Ultramarines had an unbreakable fighting spirit, which would, by the end, and also by the end of the battle, this would really turn the tides for the Ultramarines, but also Lorgar just sent Guilliman out into space and didn't make sure that he was dead. So that definitely comes back with consequences. Anyways, I digress. So the ships in orbit, the Wordbearer ships in orbit, had started to drop fire on the planet in the southern hemisphere, and on the other side of the planet, on the northern continent, Captain Remus Ventinus of the 4th Company of the Ultramarines, he was able to escape a skirmish with the Wordbearers just barely, and of his small group that he'd had, he was, as far as I can tell, the only survivor. But he was just kind of running around looking for really anybody that would be on his side. And he ran into a group of Skitarii, and those are Magos. They're tech guards. They're sort of on the same level as just like a foot soldier. They're there to guard the technology and fight when necessary. And these are cyborgs and had their minds absolutely wiped. Now, they're different from true servitors because they're still capable of independent thought. I do believe they kind of have their own personalities, but either way, Captain Ventinus would run into a small group of them, and this would include the survivors of the orbital platform, Magos Taurin and her group that had managed to escape from there. So he finds these guys. So this group of Skitarii, they did have an independent Vox channel that the Wordbearers hadn't managed to either shut down or listen in on. So Captain Ventinus was able to use it to contact Captain Lyro Sidance, who was also a captain of the fourth Company. So after brief conversation, they agreed that it would be good to meet up, join forces, and have a stronger group to face the threat of the Wordbearers. Their agreed rendezvous point would be a palace called Leptius Numinus, and this had once belonged to a governor on the planet, but I'm not sure if in the initial battle this guy just was in a wrong place at the wrong time, or if this place had been abandoned for a long time. Either way, that was the decided meeting point. So Ventinus and the Skitarii would get there before Captain Sidance did, and just as they kind of got in, got settled, got their bearings, they quickly would they were quickly under attack by the Wordbearers. And the Wordbearers that found them and were starting to lay siege did alert Corferon that there was this small group of Ultramarines and Skitarii and whatnot. And at first, Corferon was like, I don't think it's worth delegating resources to deal with these guys. They're just we need to focus on the main battle and whatnot. But quickly was actually, even though this is a small group, they might pose a really big threat. So he sent a commander of the Wordbearers, Morpal Xir, to go and deal with this group and take them out so that they wouldn't be able to join forces as they were planning to do with more of the Ultramarines. So back at the palace, they did figure out that the palace had its own defense cogitators, and Magos Taurin was able to power it up, get it back working, and they were able to use this to their advantage against the Wordbearers. Now, there wasn't a weapon system, but they had communications over the whole palace, and as well, they were able to use the Auspex scanners, which were able to sort of give them an idea of where the Wordbearers were, what their numbers were, what weaponry they were packing, all of that good stuff. So even though the Wordbearers were heavy attacking on the palace, with the defense system at their disposal, Ventinus and this group of Skitarii were able to hold the Wordbearers off for long enough that Captain Sidance was able to come up behind and ambush this group of Wordbearers and then wipe them out, and then the two captains were able to join forces. Sidance had a small number of men with him, so they were able to get together and start making a plan. Now, at this point, we're about 11 hours into the battle. The communications were restored, at this point, and the scattered units of the Marines were now able to communicate with each other, which would definitely be helpful in the next little bit here. Now, less fortunately, up in orbit on the Macragge's honor, the demons that Lorgar had summoned were still wreaking havoc, causing destruction, killing Marines, all of that good stuff. But, and in the bridge, I don't know if he had been in the bridge and managed to hold on in the initial summoning of the demons, but First Master Marius Gage was duking it out with some demons. He was almost killed, but he was able to scrape by. His wounds were just not quite fatal, but he was down for the count just about. Thankfully, one of the sergeants called Aenid Thiel was leading a small group of Marines killing demons and whatnot. They were able to find Gage and save him. Now, Thiel, he was... his situation is a little bit ironic here. Just before this all was going on, he had been flagged for censure. He was set to be struck out of the records of the Ultramarines and of the Imperium altogether because he had been preparing theoretical scenarios and trying to come up with battle plans and whatnot in the case that Ultramarines were ever to be fighting each other, like Legion versus Legion, etc. So even though this was going to be basically the end of his life as he knew it, he now has the advantage, or at least he's more adaptable because he's already kind of had the thought of what if legions are having to fight legions, and now it is actually happening. And where Guilliman took so long to realize what was going on because he couldn't fathom infighting amongst the brothers to this degree, it took him off guard, and it took him crucial moments to recuperate, but Thiel is already fully prepared for that. Well, maybe not fully, but he is ready to go. So Thiel meets up with Gage, saves him from the demons, and after they've kind of conversed a little bit, Gage gives him the go-ahead, and Thiel leads his group to continue exterminating all of the demons on the ship. Within an hour of this crew going around, they were able to successfully eliminate all of the demons, and they were able to get Gage back into the bridge of the ship, and at this time, they were able to contact Captain Ventinus on the surface in that palace. At this point, Gage can see the full scale of what's going on. He knew that the circumstances were quite grim at this point. He was able to see sort of what had become of the fleet, and then with communications, he's also able to tell what's going on the planet. And at this point, like I said in the initial skirmish, about half of the mustered Ultramarines were dead, about 100,000 or more, and the space fleet, all of the ships that they had mustered, there was only about 1/5 of them remaining at this point. On the ground, there were about 30,000 legionnaires left, and then between Mechanicum soldiers and Imperial Army soldiers, there were maybe 200,000, which really is not a lot. And on the ground, they were scattered into groups and quite small groups all over the planet that had, until the comms came back up, no way of, they were far enough away that there was no way that they might have run into each other conveniently. Anyways, at this point, for the Ultramarines, the biggest thing that was... The biggest reason that they weren't completely wiped out by this point is that the word bearers were, yes, focused on fighting on the ground, but of the fleet ships, any of the remaining Ultramarine battleships, the word bearers were trying to take over. They were trying to actually take the ships. They weren't just straight out destroying them. They were boarding the ships and trying to wipe out all of the Ultramarines on board. And because they were trying to preserve the ships, that put them at a disadvantage by quite a bit. And the Marines would be leading people in small squads to prevent the word bearers from boarding, mainly the McCragg's Honor, but also the rest of the big battleships. He was sort of like in communication with the rest of the people on the other ships and directing them to keep the word bearers out. But it was still very grim. The Ultramarines on the ships were outnumbered 8-1, which was not good. However, due to the fact that Lorgar did not make sure that Guilliman was dead, Guilliman returns. Surprise, surprise. He was able to survive getting chucked out into space, and he was able to make his way back to the McCragg's Honor. Before he even got back on the ship, he was able to terminate a good number of word bearers just with his bare hands, and then Thiel saw him coming and was able to convince Guilliman to get back on the ship. So we'll jump back down to the planet quickly, and at this point, we are going to see the return of a demonic pain in the ass. That is our good friend Samus. Samus, I can't remember how we pronounced that in the previous episode, but this is the guy that when they were on Erebus and Horus and all of them were on the planet 6319, and they were in the mountains and everything was like really freaky deaky, and Erebus ended up killing Loken. This is the demon that kind of was, he showed up before, but this was technically his birth when Erebus killed Loken. But because of warp stuff, the timeline for them is kind of however Games Workshop decides it to be. Anyways, I digress. Samus would possess that commander of the word bearers that I had mentioned that was trying to get into the palace, Commander Xur, and the commander had been captured, restrained by Ventinus and Sidance, but Samus was able to possess him, and after putting up a really good fight, Ventinus was able to dispatch Samus and also, in effect, the other commander. And so that kind of turned out okay. So after they managed to get rid of the demon, and of course they don't truly kill the demon, they just send him back to the warp, because I believe, as Ethan said when we were talking about Samus the first time, when a demon is named, they're going to come up a bunch more times. Anyways, back to a less demonic, but still very much pain in the butt, Erebus. A negative round of applause. Whatever the opposite of a round of applause is, we'll give that for Erebus right now. Everybody boo Erebus. Anyways, he was working on a really big dark ritual in just the sort of wilderness of the planet. And he was almost finished up with his ritual, and he would sort of time that with what Corferon was doing. And what it was that Corferon was doing, he was still in Calth's orbital weapons platform, and he turned all of Calth's weapons that he had been previously using to shoot at all of the neighboring planets and whatnot onto the literal sun of the system. So things are looking pretty grim. Guilliman is back, and that is good, but things are kind of in shambles, and Erebus is almost done with this ritual, and Corferon is trying to blow up the literal sun. But this is where things are going to start looking a little bit better for the Ultramarines. As Corferon is trying to blow up the sun, Magos Tauren finally found the kill code that Magos Hest had created. She was still with a small group of she was still with Captain Ventinus and Sidance, and they were able to find the computer that had the kill code stored in it. So she was able to get into that computer, and from there she was able to activate the kill code, which completely eradicated the scrap code. Now, from the palace, from Leptis Numinous, she wasn't able to do much more than that. The computers were not powerful enough. The Ultramarines that would step up to work on getting the defense grid back in order, it was a group of about 50 Ultramarines, and it was led by Guilliman himself. They would teleport to the defense platform, and they would face off against Corferon. In the few seconds after they teleported in, Corferon was able to use his warp powers to stun Guilliman, and Guilliman is down. He is stunned. He is not fully unconscious, but he's not able to do anything at the moment. So Corferon, he happens to have the Anathema Blade, the very one that he used to corrupt Horus, and in the initial moment, he was going to just straight up kill Guilliman, but at the last second, he didn't cause a fatal blow because he really, really wanted to be able to corrupt Guilliman with this blade. But little did Corferon know, Guilliman actually happens to be resistant to the chaos corruption of this blade. So while Corferon is just kind of hovering over him in the midst of stabbing him, Guilliman was able to reach up with his power claw and rip out Corferon's main heart. And this doesn't kill Corferon because Space Marines have 9 hearts, and I can't remember if Corferon was turned fully into a Marine or if he was just modified. I can't remember if he was young enough to go through the gene seed stuff. But either way, Corferon has multiple hearts, be it 9 or be it less than that, and he does survive getting his main heart ripped out. His heart's pulled out, and it doesn't kill him, but he does try to make a hasty retreat because he's got his main elite guard with him, and they are just trying to get the heck out of Dodge at this point. While that's happening, Thiel was with this group of Ultramarines, and he quickly would start destroying all of the data systems in the defense grid, which would... Now, this doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, because if he destroys I'm not sure if he's destroying just the hard drives, if you will, so that the word bearers can't continue to hold control of the defense grid, or if he was straight up destroying the computers, which wouldn't make sense because then they wouldn't be able to get it back online. So I'm assuming that it's meant that he was destroying all of the information and not the computers themselves. But either way, the defense grid is now not in control of the word bearers anymore. So Ventinus, I feel like, as far as I know at this point, he's still up in the palace, but he leaves the palace now, and he does leave a small part of the group to defend the computer that had the kill code in it, because they still might need that data engine going. But Ventinus, he sets out with the rest of his crew, and we're going to go and find some other survivors from the 4th Company that were in a different location, and then they were going to work together to counter the word bearers, and the word bearers are now in control. They were in the control of Hol Belroth and Foedral Fell. The Ultramarines were still severely outnumbered at this point in this. Even though they went to find more people coming up to the word bearers, they were still ridiculously outnumbered. But they were able to find some, the very, very few surviving units from the 111th and 112th Company. They also were able to get help from the 19th Company, led by Captain Aethron. There were some Titans as well that were following command of the Tetrarch Nicodemus, and then there was a relief force that was able to come in and help them out, led by another Tetrarch, and that was Lemmiad. Oh, I didn't write his that was his last name. I didn't write his first name down, but another tetrarch, and they also were able to find a dreadnought, and that was the dreadnought Telemachus. This standoff, if it had been a normal, like, just simple battle between the Wordbearers and the Ultramarines, the Wordbearers definitely would still have been able to wipe out the Marines, even if it just took longer that they had this backup. But that was not the way that this was going to go. After everything went down on the orbital platform, getting Corferon kicked out and all of that good stuff, Taran was finally able to take control of the weapons grid again. And she used that to rain destruction on the Wordbearers, the fleet, and the ground units. And Macraig's Honor would also start firing as well with Taran, and that was the huge tipping point for the battle here. While this skirmish is going on, Corferon and his guard, they did manage to escape. They were able to teleport to the Infidious Imperator, which was one of the flagships for the Wordbearers, and they were trying to chart a quick course out of the system with their tail between their legs. Tails between the tail, whatever. They're trying to get the heck out of there. Guilliman notices this, and he orders First Master Gage to follow in hot pursuit with the Macraig's Honor, and they end up getting the skirmish that they would get into. These two ships would go down as one of the most epic naval battles in, as far as I know, Warhammer lore, certainly just in Imperial history. There was warp stuff going on. It was just absolutely insane. And by warp stuff, I mean they were in the warp battling, but I digress. While the Ultramarines had managed to teleport into the orbital platform on time to stop Corferon from blowing up the sun, like before it actually went supernova, it was still unfortunately too late in terms of the point where the sun had got to. It was poisoned somehow, and it was like the aging of the sun had accelerated immensely, and the radiation from the sun was becoming lethal to the point where they needed to evacuate immediately the entire system. But before, there wasn't enough time for all of the ground units of the Ultramarines to get off of the planet, so anyone that was on the ground, Calth has these major, massive cave systems throughout the entire planet, and that is where the Ultramarines would go to survive the initial onslaught of radiation. But any of the fleet ships, and I think Guilliman was back on a fleet ship by this point, they had to leave immediately, and any of the other planets that were still okay, everyone got out, or everyone needed to get out. I digress. Back to the radiation going on. The remaining Ultramarines, led by Captain Ventinus, they, scurried off into the caves, and any of the surviving World Eaters followed them into the caves as well. And this would start a new phase of the Battle of Calth that was called the Underground War, which I will get into later. So, back to the whole battle altogether. It's been almost 24 hours since Mark 0 started, and the battle it's officially over at this point as the Ultramarine fleet is leaving the system. But I'll get into why it's not quite the end after some more information here. So back on the plateau, we're going to get back to Erebus here for a moment. He has finished his ritual finally, and he... At this point, nobody's really told Erebus what's going on. He assumes that the Ultramarines have been successfully crippled enough that they have succeeded, but he rips a hole in the Materium and dips. Erebus is gone. He has left the party. Now, he was, however, followed by a small group of human soldiers that had been, like, human Imperium soldiers, and they were led by a guy who was retired, actually. His name was Ol Persson, and he was guided by everybody's favorite John Grammaticus. Like, Grammaticus was, like, telling him that he should go in. I don't think Grammaticus was present, but Ol Persson... he's a retired guy, and they named him Ol Persson. Thank you Games Workshop. Anyways, that group follows Erebus into his little secret warp tunnel, but we don't know how that has ended yet. There is no current information on how that has gone. Either way, so yeah, that is the main outcome of the battle, that it wasn't necessarily a win or a loss, kind of, but the Ultramarines lived. They were not completely exterminated. So nobody really won, but nobody really lost either. Now, there were a lot more sort of outcomes and offshoots from this main battle. Like I said, there was the underground war, there was the ships that went off, and then there's also a couple of other things that happen as well, but I believe I will leave this part of the episode here, and I will talk about all of the offshoot stuff I will make this a third part for you guys so that it's just a little bit more broken up and it's not just an onslaught of all this information, because if I keep going now, we're probably going to be closer to 2 hours. So thank you everybody for being here for this episode. I will end it here. I'll just do a little bit more house cleaning. Thank you all for sticking around for this episode. I hope that it wasn't without Ethan here to have us go back and forth, because sometimes, like, if I do the research, he has information that he knows. If he's got the research done, then I have more questions usually, and we can kind of go back and forth off each other. But this episode is sort of, I tried to not read off my notes as much and just kind of talk about all that I learned. But either way, thank you for sitting through this. If there's any questions about it, anything that I talked about today, or any corrections, please feel free to let us know in the comments, and we'll go through those later. But yeah, thank you for being here. If you're listening to this episode on YouTube, feel free to drop us a like. If you're not subscribed yet, go ahead and do that. If you want to follow along with more of our lore and whatnot, if you're on the Spotify, drop us a like, give us a download if you can. That really helps us out. If you're on any of the other social media platforms, thank you so much for being here. Obviously, if you're on any of these social media platforms listening to this, then that's got to be some psyker warp magic, because we haven't posted any of our episodes on the other social media platforms yet, unless you're from the future, in which case, hello from the past. I hope the future's going good. Anyways, with that, I will leave it off, and I will talk about all of the rest of the stuff going on in next week's episode. Bye!